A pregnant woman in a yellow gown falls to the marble floor of a charity gala. Blood spreads across her dress. 300 guests watch in horror. But her husband does not help her. He laughs. What he does not know is that someone is recording everything. And what happens next will destroy his empire, his freedom, and everyone who helped him. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is about a woman who remembered who she was before they tried to break her. If this story moves you, drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss how this satisfying revenge unfolds. Let us begin. The chandelier lights above the Plaza Hotel ballroom looked like 1,000 frozen stars, casting their golden glow across crystal glasses and silk gowns. 300 of Manhattan's wealthiest citizens had gathered for the annual Prescott Foundation Charity Gala, their diamonds catching the light, their laughter filling the air with practiced elegance. The orchestra played something soft and romantic, the kind of music meant for champagne toasts and polite conversation. But beneath all that beauty, something darker was waiting to unfold. Tell us what time you are listening and where you are watching from. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What happens next will shock everyone in that ballroom and change everything one woman thought she knew about survival. Sloane Callahan Prescott stood before the mirror in the hotel suite, her hand resting on the curve of her 7-month pregnant belly. The yellow gown she wore caught the light like liquid sunshine, custom made by a designer whose name appeared in magazines she used to read before her life became a gilded prison. The fabric was soft against her skin, the color warm and hopeful. But her eyes told a different story entirely. They were the eyes of a woman who had learned to hide. At 31 years old, Sloane still carried traces of the fearless journalist she had once been. The sharp cheekbones, the intelligent gaze, the posture of someone who had once walked into rooms expecting to be heard. But 3 years of marriage to Harrison Prescott had taught her a different kind of posture. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes cast downward, voice soft and agreeable. The posture of survival. Her husband appeared in the mirror behind her, adjusting his bow tie with the casual confidence of a man who had never been told no. At 42, Harrison Prescott looked exactly like the magazines portrayed him. Silver-touched temples that suggested wisdom rather than age. A jaw that could have been carved from marble. The easy smile of someone who knew exactly how powerful he was and enjoyed every moment of it. He did not look at her as he spoke. That dress makes you look larger than you are. Try to stand behind the floral arrangements during photos. My mother will be watching, and you'd know how she feels about appearances. Sloane kept her voice steady, the way she had learned to do. I am 7 months pregnant. Harrison, the baby is growing. Exactly my point. He moved past her toward the door, his cologne leaving a trail of expensive sandalwood. Remember what we discussed? Smile, nod. Do not embarrass me tonight. The Thornberry account is close to signing, and I need everything to be perfect. When the door closed behind him, Sloane exhaled slowly. The air seemed to leave her body in stages, carrying with it the tension she had been holding since she woke up that morning. 3 years of marriage had taught her the rhythm of survival in the Prescott household. Agree in public, disappear in private. Never let him see you cry. She turned back to the mirror, practicing the smile she would wear all evening. It looked almost real. Almost. Her hand moved automatically to straighten his tuxedo jacket, still draped over the chair where he had left it. As she lifted the fabric, something fell from the inside pocket. A small rectangle of plastic that clattered softly against the hardwood floor. A hotel keycard. The Carlisle Hotel, room 1407. The plastic was warm in her hand, carrying the weight of every suspicion she had buried for the past 6 months. The late nights at the office that stretched until dawn. The whispered phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. The unfamiliar perfume that clung to his collar. Something floral and young that she had never worn. She had known about Vivian Marlowe for weeks now. The junior partner at Harrison's firm who laughed too loudly at his jokes and touched his arm too often at company events. Sloane had hired a private investigator 3 months ago, a discreet man named Thomas Fletcher who specialized in wealthy clients with wandering spouses. The photographs he had provided were damning. Vivian and Harrison entering a hotel, Vivian and Harrison sharing an intimate dinner, Vivian and Harrison in the back of his town car. their bodies pressed together in ways that left no room for innocent interpretation. Sloane had been gathering evidence quietly, methodically, the way she had once gathered evidence for investigative stories that brought down corrupt politicians. She had planned to confront Harrison tonight, after the gala, in private where she could maintain control of the conversation. She would present him with the photographs. She would demand a divorce on her terms. She would walk away with her dignity and her daughter intact. She slipped the keycard into her clutch, feeling its weight like a promise. Tonight would be the night she finally spoke the truth. But what Sloane did not know, what she could not possibly have known as she descended the grand staircase into the glittering ballroom, was that Harrison already knew about her investigation. He knew about the private investigator. He knew about the photographs. He knew about every move she had made to gather evidence against him. And this gala was not a charity event. It was a trap. The ballroom was magnificent in the way that only obscene amounts of money could create. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from ceiling, painted with Renaissance-style murals. Tables draped in white linen held centerpieces of white roses and gold candelabras. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays of champagne and delicate appetizers that cost more per bite than most people earned in an hour. Sloane navigated through the crowd carefully, one hand resting on her belly, accepting compliments she did not believe. "You look absolutely radiant. Darling, pregnancy suits you so well. Thank you." She smiled the practiced smile. "We are very excited. Harrison must be over the moon. A son to carry on the Prescott name. Actually, it is a girl. But yes, he is thrilled." The lies came easily after years of practice. She spotted Harrison near the stage, surrounded by a cluster of investors and board members. He was telling a story, his hands moving expressively, his laughter the loudest sound in the room. People leaned in when he spoke, drawn by the gravitational pull of his charisma. That was his gift, the ability to make everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world. Until they were not. Then she saw her, Vivian Marlowe. Vivian moved through the crowd like a warning light, her red satin dress cutting through the sea of pastels and blacks like a blade through silk. At 28, she was beautiful in a sharp, calculating way. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes that assessed every interaction for potential advantage. Their gazes met across the room. Vivian smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had spotted wounded prey. Sloane's heart began to pound against her ribs. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the way Harrison kept glancing toward Vivian, in the way certain guests seemed to be watching her more closely than usual, in the way the air itself felt charged with anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. She took her seat at the center table, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. The baby kicked once, hard, as if sensing her mother's growing unease. When Harrison took the stage to deliver his speech about the Prescott Foundation's charitable achievements, his voice filled the room with practiced warmth. He spoke of giving back to the community, of lifting up those less fortunate, of the privilege and responsibility that came with wealth. But Sloane noticed that he kept looking past her, toward Vivian, toward his mother Claire in the back corner, toward the photographers positioned at every angle. When the applause erupted at the end of his speech, Vivian began walking toward Sloane's table. Each click of her designer heels against the marble floor sounded like a countdown to something terrible. Sloane gripped the edge of the tablecloth. Whatever was about to happen, she would face it with dignity. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She was wrong about that, too. Vivian stopped 3 feet from Sloane's table, positioning herself so that the nearby photographers could capture every moment. The crowd noise seemed to fade, as if the entire ballroom had collectively held its breath. The orchestra paused between songs, leaving only the delicate clink of champagne glasses and the whispered conversations of guests who sensed something dramatic unfolding. Vivian's voice dripped with false sweetness, pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Lovely evening, is it not? I was not sure you would come tonight. Harrison mentioned that the pregnancy has been so difficult for you, all those mood swings. The paranoia?" Sloane kept her expression neutral, though her pulse was racing. "I feel perfectly fine. Thank you for your concern." "Do you?" Vivian tilted her head in mock sympathy. "Because Harrison tells me you have been acting so strangely lately. Following him, hiring investigators, searching through his things like some jealous teenager. He is worried about you." Sloan, she paused, letting the words sink in. We both are. The word we landed like a physical blow. Sloane's fingers tightened around her napkin, her knuckles going white. Around them, she could see phones lifting subtly, recording devices capturing every word and expression. This was not a private confrontation. This was a public execution. This is not the place for this discussion, Sloane said quietly. Vivian stepped closer, close enough that Sloane could smell her perfume, the same floral scent that clung to Harrison's collar. Oh, but I think it is the perfect place. Everyone should see what happens when a wife cannot accept reality, when she becomes so obsessed with her delusions that she hires strangers to follow her husband. Sloane started to rise, gripping the table for balance. At 7 months pregnant, every movement required careful calculation. Her belly made quick reactions impossible. Please, she said, keeping her voice steady, just leave me alone. Vivian's smile widened into something predatory. He told me about your little detective game, the key card you found tonight. That was cute. He wanted you to find it. This whole evening, he has been waiting to see what you would do. The words crashed over Sloane like ice water. A setup. All of it had been a setup. The keycard left deliberately in his pocket. The confrontation here, in front of 300 witnesses and countless cameras. Harrison was not being careless with his affair. He was building a narrative. Paranoid pregnant wife. Unstable. Obsessive. Dangerous. Before Sloane could respond, before she could process what was happening, Vivian's legs swung forward with sudden, violent force. Her designer heel connected with the base of Sloane's chair, striking the support beam with precise accuracy. The chair tipped backward. Glass shattered somewhere nearby as Sloane's hand swept across the table, grasping for anything to hold on to. A gasp swept through the ballroom like a wave. Time seemed to slow as Sloane fell backward, her body twisting instinctively to protect her belly, her arms wrapping around her unborn daughter even as the marble floor rushed up to meet her. The impact was terrible. Her shoulder hit first, sending a shock of pain through her entire body, then her hip, then the back of her head. The sound of her own skull striking marble echoed in her ears, hollow and sickening. For one eternal moment, the world went silent. She lay on the cold floor, staring up at the chandelier lights, watching them fracture and spin above her. Her yellow gown spread around her like a fallen sun. Her hands stayed pressed against her belly, feeling for movement, praying for movement. Then the screaming started. Oh my God, she is pregnant. Someone get help. Call an ambulance. Did you see what happened? That woman kicked her chair. Sloane tried to speak, tried to move, but her body would not obey. Pain radiated from her abdomen, deep and terrifying. She could feel something warm spreading beneath her, soaking through the fabric of her beautiful yellow gown. Blood. She was bleeding. Her vision blurred as Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. What is all this commotion about? He pushed through the crowd of horrified guests, his expression carefully arranged into concern. For one desperate, foolish moment, Sloane thought he was coming to help her. She reached toward him with a trembling hand. Harrison, she whispered. The baby. Please. He looked down at her, his wife bleeding on the marble floor of the ballroom, and his expression shifted into something she had never seen before, something cold and calculating and utterly devoid of humanity. Then he laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable chuckle. It was a sharp, deliberate sound, designed to be heard by everyone in the vicinity, the kind of laugh meant to establish a narrative. She tripped, he announced loudly, addressing the crowd rather than helping his wife. For God's sake. Everyone stopped staring. She is always making scenes like this. So dramatic. A woman near the front, someone Sloane did not recognize, spoke up with horror in her voice. She did not trip. I saw it. That woman in the red dress kicked her chair. Harrison ignored the protest. He crouched down beside Sloane, close enough that only she could hear his whispered words. Now everyone knows you are crazy. He breathed into her ear. His smile was the coldest thing she had ever seen. And after tonight, no one will ever believe a word you say. The world began to fade at the edges, darkness creeping in from all sides. Through the blur of tears and agony, Sloane saw cameras flashing. She saw Vivian stepping back into the crowd, her expression carefully arranged into innocent shock. She saw Harrison's mother, Claire, watching from the corner with satisfaction written across her elegant features. Then another face appeared above her, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a silver name badge that read Beatrice Donovan, event coordinator. Bea dropped to her knees beside Sloane, heedless of the blood staining her professional skirt. Stay with me, honey. I saw everything. I am calling 911 right now. Her hands were gentle as she cradled Sloane's head, keeping her neck stable. Around them, chaos continued to swirl, but Bea's voice remained steady and calm. I recorded everything, Bea whispered. Her words meant only for Sloane. On my phone, the whole thing. They are not going to get away with I promise you. Sloane tried to respond, tried to hold on to consciousness, but the darkness was winning. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the distant wail of approaching sirens. The last thing she saw was Harrison's face reflected in one of the mirrored walls. He was still smiling. The sirens cut through the Manhattan night like a desperate scream. Inside the ambulance, machines beeped in urgent rhythm with Sloane's fading heartbeat. Paramedics moved around her with practiced precision, their voices calm but their hands fast. We are losing blood here. Lots of it. What is our ETA to St. Helena General 4 minutes out? I radioed ahead. They have the trauma team standing by. Sloane drifted in and out of awareness. The city lights smearing past the ambulance windows like wet watercolors. Pain pulsed through her body with every heartbeat. But beneath it, she could still feel something. Movement, faint but persistent. Her daughter, still alive, still fighting. Someone held her hand. Through the haze of pain and medication, she recognized the face of Bea Donovan, the event coordinator who had refused to leave her side. You are going to be okay, Bea said, tears streaming down her face, both of you. Just keep breathing, keep fighting. Help is coming. The hospital doors burst open, and suddenly there were more hands, more voices, more blinding lights. White ceilings flashed overhead as they rushed her through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Voices overlapped in urgent medical shorthand. Pregnant female, approximately 31 years old. Abdominal trauma with heavy bleeding. Possible placental abruption. Someone began cutting away her ruined yellow gown, the fabric falling away in blood-soaked strips. Fetal heart rate detected but weak. We need to stabilize her now. Then a new voice cut through the chaos, commanding and calm in a way that seemed to quiet the surrounding panic. I am Dr. Ramona Hughes. I will be taking care of you tonight, Sloane. Can you hear me? Sloane tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled her words. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, searching for reassurance that her daughter was still there. Dr. Hughes leaned close, her dark eyes warm with compassion. Your baby is still with us. Her heartbeat is weak but steady. We need to operate to stop the bleeding. Do you understand? Sloane managed a weak nod. For what felt like hours, she existed in a fog of bright surgical lights and whispered numbers. Pain came in waves, cresting and falling like ocean tides. At some point, she heard Dr. Hughes say the bleeding is controlled. We have stabilized the placenta. At another point, someone mentioned she is lucky to be alive. A few more minutes and we would have lost them both. When Sloane finally woke properly, the world had changed. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines monitoring her vital signs. Gray morning light filtered through the window, painting everything in gentle shades of silver. Her hand moved immediately to her stomach, and relief flooded through her when she felt the bandages still rounded over the curve of her belly. Still pregnant, still alive. A gentle knock came at the door. Dr. Hughes entered, looking tired but relieved. Good morning, Sloane. How are you feeling, my baby? Sloane whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube. Is she okay? Dr. Hughes pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down with the careful posture of someone delivering complicated news. Your daughter is stable. Her heart rate has strengthened considerably overnight. She is a fighter. But there is something else. Sloane said. It was not a question. She could read it in the doctor's hesitation. You have a placental tear. It is not severe enough to require immediate delivery, but it means complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. No stress, no physical exertion, nothing that could cause the tear to worsen. She paused. And Sloane, I need to ask you something. Sloane waited. During your examination, I noticed some bruising that appears older than last night. On your arms, your ribs. Signs of injuries that healed weeks or months ago. She met Sloane's eyes directly. Is there anything you want to tell me about your home situation? Sloane looked away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. I have seen this before. Dr. Hughes continued gently. Women who seem to have everything but actually have nothing. Women whose lives look perfect from the outside while they are being destroyed from the inside. If you need help, there are resources. People who specialize in situations exactly like yours. Before Sloan could respond, the door opened and Harrison walked in. He carried an enormous bouquet of roses and wore an expression of devoted worry that would have convinced anyone who did not know better. "Darling," he said, his voice heavy with relief, "thank God you are awake. I have been here all night, worried out of my mind." Dr. Hughes stood, her expression carefully neutral. "I will give you some privacy." She met Sloane's eyes with a meaningful look. "Press the call button if you need anything. Anything at all." When the door closed, Harrison's expression transformed. The devoted husband disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. He dropped the flowers carelessly on a chair and moved closer to the bed. "You made quite a spectacle last night. The video is already everywhere online. Unstable pregnant wife causes scene at charity gala." He smiled thinly. "My publicist is working overtime to manage the narrative." Sloan stared at him, still processing what had happened. "You laughed. While I was bleeding on the floor, you laughed at me." I was in shock. His tone suggested she was being unreasonable. "And now we need to discuss how you are going to handle the press. They are camped outside the hospital. They need a statement from the devoted wife who is grateful for her husband's support during this difficult time." "She kicked me." Sloane's voice cracked. "Your mistress kicked me." Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Vivian lost her balance. It was an accident. An unfortunate accident that would not have happened if you had not been making a scene about things that do not concern you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "You are going to sign this statement. Then you are going to tell the reporters exactly what I tell you to say." Sloan looked at the paper but did not take it. "And if I refuse," Harrison's smile returned. But it was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Then I will have you committed. Postpartum psychosis is more common than people think. Pregnant women experience breaks with reality all the time. My lawyers have the paperwork ready. One signature from a concerned husband, a few statements from paid medical professionals, and you will spend the next year in a psychiatric facility." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. "Sign the statement. Sloan, tell the press you tripped. Tell them your loving husband is taking wonderful care of you. Or I will make sure you never see your daughter outside of a supervised facility." Sloane's hands trembled as she looked at the document. For the first time since the gala, she understood exactly how much danger she was in. This was not a marriage. It was a war. And she had just lost the first battle. 1 week after the gala, Sloan found herself living in a prison made of marble and silk. The Prescott penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park. Priceless artwork adorned walls painted in sophisticated neutrals. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that only comes from an army of invisible housekeepers. To anyone looking in from the outside, it was paradise. To Sloan, it was a cage with a beautiful view. Harrison had installed cameras throughout the apartment for her safety. He explained to anyone who asked. Her phone calls were monitored by his security team. Her emails passed through servers he controlled. When she tried to leave for a doctor's appointment, she found a nurse waiting in the lobby to accompany her there and back. "Just a precaution," Harrison said pleasantly when she protested. "Given your condition, we cannot be too careful." She was 7.5 months pregnant, confined to bed rest, and completely cut off from the world she had known. Her parents believed she was resting comfortably with her loving husband watching over her. Her former colleagues at the newspaper thought she had happily retired into wealthy obscurity. No one knew the truth. No one except Della Thornton. Della appeared at the penthouse door on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a basket of expensive spa products and wearing a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. They had been college roommates at Columbia, the kind of friends who could finish each other's sentences and shared secrets they had never told anyone else. Now Della worked as a forensic accountant, the person corporations called when money disappeared into places it should not be. "Surprise visit," Della announced loudly, clearly aware of the cameras watching the doorway. "I brought face masks and foot soaks, just what the doctor ordered for my favorite pregnant lady." Harrison watched from his home office doorway. Della, how unexpected. I called ahead. Actually, Zubaman, Della's voice remained bright and cheerful. Your assistant said Sloan desperately needed some girl time, and I brought enough pampering supplies for a small army. In the bedroom, with a spa playlist playing loudly enough to cover their whispered conversation, Della dropped the cheerful act immediately. Tell me everything, she said, her expression fierce with concern, and I mean everything. Do not leave anything out. Sloane's words came out in a rush, like water bursting through a dam. The affair, the gala, the assault, the threats. Harrison's plan to have her committed if she spoke out against him. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face and Della had gone pale with fury. We need evidence, Della said firmly. Something he cannot deny or destroy. Something that proves what he is doing to you. I had a private investigator. Sloane's voice cracked with despair. Thomas Fletcher. He had photographs of Harrison and Vivian together. Documentation of the affair. But Harrison found out about him. He threatened Fletcher's family. The man dropped the case and disappeared. Della was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind processing the situation. Then she pulled a small leather notebook from her purse and slipped it under Sloane's pillow. Write everything down, she instructed. Dates, times, exact quotes from conversations. Everything you can remember about the abuse, the threats, the financial control. I will come back for visits. We will communicate through this notebook. He can monitor your phone and email, but he cannot read what is in your head. Over the next 2 weeks, Della visited 3 more times. Each visit appeared to be exactly what it seemed. A supportive friend bringing comfort to a bedridden pregnant woman, loud laughter, visible relaxation activities, the kind of female bonding that Harrison dismissed as harmless and boring. But each visit also included whispered updates passed through the notebook. Anyone who has ever felt trapped knows the particular torture of hope. Hope that someone might notice. Hope that someone might help. Hope that the nightmare might end. But hope can also be dangerous when it blinds you to how much worse things can get. Della's forensic skills had uncovered something massive. Harrison's hedge fund was hemorrhaging money. $400 million in catastrophic losses from bad investments, hidden through creative accounting and offshore she companies. And to cover those losses, he had been slowly draining Sloane's family trust. Money her grandparents had left her that she had never thought to monitor closely. If you divorce him, you expose the fraud, Della explained during her 4th visit. The forensic trail would lead investigators directly to the embezzlement. He would lose everything. His fun, his reputation, his freedom. Sloane felt ice spreading through her veins as she understood. And if something happens to me during childbirth, if there are complications that cannot be explained, he inherits everything. Your trust, your share of the marital assets. And no one ever looks too closely at the books because the grieving widower is too sympathetic to investigate. You think he would actually hurt me? Even as she asked the question, Sloane knew the answer. She had seen it in his eyes at the gala. The coldness, the calculation, the complete absence of anything resembling love. I think he already has. Della's eyes were hard with determination. We need to get you out of here, soon. But when Sloane tried to access her own bank accounts from the laptop Harrison had provided, she found them frozen. When she tried to call her parents from the penthouse landline, Harrison's secretary interrupted to explain that the line was needed for urgent business calls. When she attempted to email a journalist she had worked with during her reporting days, she discovered that her email account had been deleted entirely. I found your little messages, Harrison said that evening, his tone almost pleasant. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, backlit by the hallway lights, so his face was impossible to read. Really, Sloane? Did you think I would not notice? Her blood went cold. I do not know what you are talking about. The notebook under your pillow. The emails you tried to send from my laptop. The forensic accountant poking through my business records. He stepped closer, and she could see his expression now. It was calm, almost amused. Your friend Della should have been more careful about covering her digital footprints. Sloane's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her temples. Harrison, please, I am carrying your daughter. Whatever you think I have done, we can talk about this. His smile was the same cold smile from the gala, the smile of a man who had already won. You wanted a war, darling, he said softly. Now you have one. For 3 days after Harrison's threat, nothing happened. The silence was somehow worse than any confrontation would have been. Sloane lay in bed, feeling her daughter kick against her ribs, and waited for the executioner's footsteps. Then Della called with news that made her heart soar. "I found another witness," Della said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "One of the waiters from the Gala. His name is Thomas Fletcher. Same first name as your private investigator. Different person entirely. He recorded the whole assault on his phone. The kick, Harrison's laughter, everything. And Sloane, the prosecutor is interested. Really interested." Hope bloomed in Sloane's chest for the first time in weeks. When they are planning to arrest Harrison at the board meeting on Friday, 3 days from now, Richard Sullivan from the district attorney's office is handling the case personally. He says the video evidence combined with the financial fraud gives them enough to move forward. Della's voice shook with excitement. 2 more days. Sloane, just hold on for 2 more days. For 48 hours. Sloane allowed herself to dream. She imagined Harrison's face when the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. She pictured herself walking out of the penthouse with her daughter, free and safe, and finally able to breathe. She envisioned a future hour where she could sleep without fear, walk without calculation, live without constantly looking over her shoulder. Friday morning arrived gray and rainy. Sloane sat by the window of her bedroom, watching droplets race down the glass and counting the minutes until 10 o'clock. The board meeting was scheduled to begin at 10. The arrest would happen shortly after. Any moment now. Her phone would ring with news of Harrison's downfall. At 11:15, her burner phone buzzed. Della's name appeared on the screen. Sloane answered immediately. "Is it done? Did they arrest him?" The silence on the other end stretched for 3 terrible heartbeats. "The prosecutor is dead," Della finally said. Her voice was hollow with shock. "Richard Sullivan. They found him this morning in his apartment. Official cause of death is cardiac arrest. But Sloane, the timing, it cannot be a coincidence." The floor seemed to drop away beneath Sloane's feet. "What about the waiter, Thomas Fletcher? The one with the video?" He recanted his statement this morning. Says he was mistaken about what he saw, that it all happened too fast to be certain. Della's voice cracked. His son suddenly received a full scholarship to an exclusive private school. His wife's medical bills from last year were anonymously paid in full. Someone got to him. Sloane pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from screaming. "What do we do now? There has to be something else we can do." There was a long pause. Then Della's voice returned, strained with something that sounded like fear. "There is something else, something worse. Harrison's lawyer filed a complaint against me this morning. Corporate espionage. They have the documents I copied from his office. They have proof I accessed his servers." 2 hours later, Sloane watched from the penthouse window as police cars arrived at her building. But they were not there for Harrison. They took Della away in handcuffs. Sloane stood frozen, helpless, as her best friend and last ally was loaded into the back of a patrol car. The rain continued to fall, streaking the window like tears she could not allow herself to shed. Not yet. Not while he might be watching. That evening, Harrison came home carrying a leather folder and wearing an expression of satisfied triumph. "Your friend will be spending quite some time awed in custody," he said conversationally. Settling into the chair across from her bed, corporate espionage is a serious charge. Federal offense. Such a shame. She seemed like such a nice person. He placed the folder on the bedside table. Inside was a document thick with legal language. "This is a post-nuptial agreement," Harrison explained. "You are going to sign it tonight. It transfers all your assets to me and waives any claim you might have to marital property. In exchange, I do not pursue charges against you for conspiracy, and I do not have you committed to a psychiatric facility." Sloane's hands trembled as she looked at the document. "And if I refuse," Harrison's smile was gentle, almost paternal, "then I will make sure everyone believes you tried to harm yourself." A tragic story. Unstable pregnant wife. Devoted husband who did everything he could to save her. He shrugged casually. "And our daughter, well, she will be raised by people who actually love her. My mother has always wanted to be more involved." There was no threat in his voice, just calm certainty. He had thought of everything, every escape route blocked, every ally eliminated, every option removed. 2 days later, alone in her gilded prison with her spirit crushed and her hope destroyed, Sloane signed the papers. The next week passed in a gray haze of despair. Sloane stopped eating. The carefully prepared meals arrived on silver trays 3 times a day and left untouched. She stopped speaking. When Harrison addressed her, she responded with monosyllables or not at all. She lay in bed with her hand resting on her belly, feeling her daughter move, and wondered if anything she had ever believed about the world was true. She had been an investigative journalist once, a good one. She had brought down a corrupt governor who had embezzled millions from public education funds. She had exposed a pharmaceutical company that had knowingly sold contaminated medications. She had believed in truth and justice and the power of one voice speaking against the darkness. What happened to that woman? Dr. Hughes came for her weekly checkup, her concerned frown deepening with each measurement she recorded. "Your blood pressure is dangerously low," the doctor said, her voice gentle but worried. "You have lost weight you cannot afford to lose. Your stress hormones are affecting the baby." She paused. "Sloane, I know what depression looks like, but this is something else. This is someone who has stopped fighting." Sloane stared at the ceiling. "What does it matter?" He signed everything away. "My friend is in prison because of me. My daughter will be raised by people who think cruelty is strength." Dr. Hughes sat down on the edge of the bed. She was quiet for a long moment. "I have been a physician for 25 years, she finally said. "I have delivered over 3,000 babies. And I have learned to recognize certain patterns. Women who seem to have everything but are actually prisoners. Women who smile in public while they are dying inside. Women whose husbands describe them as unstable while systematically destroying their ability to function." She leaned closer. "I see you, Wayne. Sloane, I see what is really happening here." Sloane turned her head to look at the doctor, really look at her. And something in Dr. Hughes's eyes, some combination of compassion and determination, made her feel less alone than she had in months. Dr. Hughes reached into her medical bag and pulled out a small object, a burner phone, cheap and disposable. "There is a number saved in this phone," she said quietly. "A women's shelter that specializes in cases exactly like yours. Wealthy women, isolated women, women whose husbands have made escape seem impossible. They can hide you. They can help." Sloane took the phone. It felt impossibly light, impossibly powerful. A lifeline from a world she had almost forgotten existed. That night, she lay awake for hours. The phone sat on her pillow, close enough to touch, offering a choice she had not believed she still had. She could call the number. She could run. She could disappear into some protection program and start over somewhere. Harrison would never find her. But then what? Harrison would claim she had abandoned her child. He would use her disappearance as proof of mental instability. He would raise their daughter alone, teaching her that strength meant cruelty and love meant control. Running was not the answer. Sometimes, the darkest moment comes not when all hope is lost, but when a single spark appears, because that spark forces you to choose: accept the darkness forever, or fight to fan that tiny flame into something that can light your way out. Most people, at some point in their lives, face that choice. The lucky ones find the courage to strike the match. Sloane sat up in bed. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. She had not always been a victim. Before Harrison, before the Gala, before the Golden Cage, she had been someone who fought back, someone who gathered evidence and built cases and exposed the truth no matter how powerful the people trying to hide it. She had been a woman who refused to stay silent. Maybe it was time to remember who that woman was. She picked up the burner phone and dialed a number she had memorized months ago, a number she had never expected to use. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, sharp with suspicion. "Hello, who is this?" "How did you get this number, Vivian?" Sloane said calmly. "We need to talk. The Carlisle Hotel, room 1407, the same room where Harrison met his mistress for their stolen afternoons." Sloane had chosen the location deliberately. Vivian was already there when Sloane arrived, standing by the window with her arms crossed defensively. She looked different from the confident predator who had strutted across the ballroom floor in her red dress. Thinner, paler, dark circles under eyes that kept darting toward the door. The look of someone whose victory had turned to poison. "You have a lot of nerve," Vivian said. "Coming here, after everything." Sloane lowered herself carefully onto the couch, her 8-month belly making every movement a careful negotiation. "So do you." They stared at each other for a long moment. Two women who should have been enemies. connected by the man who had used them both. Sloan spoke first. He is not going to marry you. Vivian's jaw tightened. You do not know that. I know Harrison. I have been studying him for 3 years, learning his patterns, his tells, the way he operates. He keeps what he already has. He never gives up control willingly. You were useful for destroying his pregnant wife's credibility. Now that job is done. What is your value to him now? The words hit their target. Vivian flinched as if she had been slapped. I have evidence, Sloan continued. I know about the fraud at the hedge fund, the 400 million in losses, the money stolen from my trust. But I cannot prove any of it because he destroyed everything I had collected. She paused, watching Vivian's face. But you can... Vivian's expression flickered through several emotions. Fear, calculation, something that might have been shame. What makes you think I have anything? Because you are a smart woman, Sloan said. And smart women who sleep with powerful married men always keep insurance. Something to protect yourself when he inevitably turns on you. I would have done the same thing. The silence stretched between them. Outside the window, traffic hummed far below. The city carried on with its business, indifferent to the war being waged in this expensive hotel room. Finally, Vivian spoke. He recorded himself. After the gala, laughing about how perfectly everything had gone, bragging about how he had staged the whole thing to make you look unstable. He sent the video to his mother as proof that he had handled the problem. Sloan's heart began to pound. Where is this video now? On Claire Prescott's personal server, at the family estate in Connecticut. That is heavily secured. Armed guards, biometric locks, the whole paranoid billionaire package. Vivian smiled thinly. I know the access codes. I have been there dozens of times. Harrison trusted me. She paused. Past tense. Why would you help me? Sloan had to ask. After everything you did, why turn on him now? Because, Vivian said quietly, her voice losing its sharp edge. He promised me the world. Partnership at the firm. Marriage after your convenient divorce. A life I have been clawing towards since I grew up in a trailer park in West Virginia with nothing but dreams and desperation. She looked out the window at the glittering city, and now I see exactly how this ends. The same way it ends for everyone who stops being useful to Harrison Prescott. I get discarded like yesterday's newspaper. Or worse. Sloan nodded slowly. If we do this together, we both walk away free. He goes to prison for fraud and assault. You get immunity for cooperating. I get my daughter and my life back. And if it does not work, then we are probably both dead anyway. At least this way we tried. 3 nights later, they executed the plan. Vivian used her access codes while Claire Prescott attended a charity function in the city. The security guards recognized Vivian and waved her through without question. The video was exactly where she had said it would be. Sloan watched it on the burner phone, her stomach churning as Harrison's recorded laughter filled the small speaker. She did not trip. Harrison's voice was gleeful, triumphant. She felt like a sack of bricks. You should have seen her face. Mother, pure shock, and the blood. It was perfect. Everyone saw. Everyone knows she is unstable now. Sloan saved the file to multiple cloud accounts, different services, different passwords. This time, the evidence would not disappear. She was still holding the phone, allowing herself one moment of triumph, when the hotel room door burst open. 4 police officers streamed in, followed by Harrison's lawyer Marcus Webb. Sloan Callahan Prescott, the lead officer, announced, "You are under arrest for theft of intellectual property, unauthorized access to private computer systems, and trespassing." Behind the officers, Harrison stepped into the doorway. His smile was patient and cold, the smile of a chess player who had anticipated every move. "Did you really think I would not prepare for this possibility?" He said, "Vivian has been keeping me informed of your little alliance since the moment you first called her." Sloan looked at Vivian, who stood frozen by the window. The younger woman's face was pale, caught somewhere between horror and helplessness. "I am sorry," Vivian whispered. "He threatened to send me to prison for the assault." 20 years, he said. "I had no choice." As the handcuffs clicked around Sloan's wrists, Harrison leaned close to her ear. "Now," he whispered softly, "I am going to take absolutely everything." The custody hearing was held in a wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of old books and broken dreams. Sloan sat at the defendant's table, 8 months pregnant, exhausted beyond words. watching her future slip away like sand through her fingers. Harrison's team of lawyers had constructed a devastating case. Medical records documenting her depression and weight loss, police reports about the theft at the family estate, testimony from household staff about her erratic behavior and refusal to eat, statements from paid medical professionals expressing concern about her mental stability, all of it building inexorably toward one conclusion. Sloan Callahan Prescott was an unfit mother. Her own lawyer, a young public defender named Sarah Bennett, who had been assigned when her personal funds were frozen, did what she could. She challenged the evidence. She questioned the credibility of witnesses who worked for Harrison. She pointed out the obvious conflict of interest in medical opinions paid for by the opposing party. But against Harrison's legal army, with their expensive suits and polished arguments and bottomless budget for expert testimony, it was like fighting a forest fire with a garden hose. Judge Patricia Winters listened with a carefully neutral expression that revealed nothing. She was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, known throughout the New York legal community for her fair rulings and low tolerance for nonsense. But even fair judges could only work with the evidence presented to them. The stolen video, the only evidence that could have proven Sloan's claims, was ruled inadmissible, obtained illegally. The judge declared, "Fruit of the poisonous tree, it cannot be considered." Sloan's allegations of abuse were dismissed as unsubstantiated. No police reports. Harrison's lawyer argued. No hospital records of domestic violence. No credible witnesses. Just the claims of a woman with documented mental health issues. Della remained in federal custody, unable to testify, her own legal battle consuming all her resources. When Judge Winters delivered her preliminary ruling, Sloan felt the world tilt and spin around her. Given the evidence presented, the judge said, her voice carrying no emotion, "I am granting temporary custody of the minor child to the father upon birth. The mother will have supervised visitation rights pending a full psychiatric evaluation." No, the word escaped before Sloan could stop it. "Your Honor, please. You do not understand what he has done." The judge's expression softened slightly, revealing a hint of sympathy beneath the professional mask. "Mrs. Prescott, I understand this ruling is difficult. I genuinely do. But based on the evidence before this court, I have no legal choice." She paused. "This is a preliminary ruling only. If new evidence emerges before the final custody determination, you may petition for reconsideration." Harrison shook hands with his lawyers, satisfaction radiating from every pore. Marcus Webb was already speaking with reporters gathered outside. The narrative was set, would be set in stone by the evening news cycle. Devoted father protects innocent child from unstable mother. As officers escorted Sloan from the courtroom, someone pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. She looked up to see Bailey Donovan, the event coordinator from the Gala, standing against the wall with terror and determination warring in her eyes. "I found my phone," B whispered quickly, urgently. "They did not destroy it. They hid it in the hotel Lost and Found, and I just got it back yesterday. The original video from the Gala. The complete recording. Everything from the moment she kicked your chair until the ambulance took you away." Sloan stared at the paper, which contained a phone number and 2 words written in shaky handwriting. "Call me." Everyone who has ever been knocked down knows the strange arithmetic of hope. How many times can you get up? How many times can you believe that this time will be different? The answer is always the same. One more time. You can always get up one more time. That night, alone in a rented room with 2 weeks until her due date and no reason to believe anything could change. Sloan made the call. Sloan had been a journalist before she was a wife, before she learned to be small and quiet and agreeable, before she forgot what it felt like to speak truth to power. Now, sitting in that tiny rented room with B. Donovan's phone in her hand, she remembered. She remembered the skills she had buried, how to build a story from scattered evidence, how to find sources willing to speak, how to present information in a way that the world could not ignore or explain away. She remembered who she had been before Harrison Prescott convinced her she was no one. And she decided, for the first time in 3 years, to stop waiting for someone else to save her. First, she verified B's video. The original file was time-stamped and completely unedited, showing everything from a camera angle that captured every crucial moment. Vivian's deliberate kick, Harrison's clear, unmistakable laughter, his approach to Sloan's fallen body, the whispered threat that audio enhancement could decode. Now everyone knows you are crazy. The words were clear as bells. Undeniable. Devastating. Then she reached out to people she had known in her former life. Fellow journalists who remembered the fearless reporter she had been. Former sources who had trusted her with their stories. Editors who had published her investigations. One of them connected her with a producer at a major network morning show who was looking for exactly this kind of story. A wealthy predator brought down by his own arrogance. A woman who fought back against impossible odds. The kind of story that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. On a rainy Tuesday morning, with Harrison's lawyers preparing final custody documents and her due date 2 weeks away, Sloane Callahan walked into a television studio and told the truth to the world. The video played on a split screen beside her face as she spoke. She did not cry. Though the memories threatened to overwhelm her, she did not look away from the camera. Though every instinct screamed at her to hide, she named Harrison's fraud with specific numbers and dates, information she had memorized from Della's research. She described his violence and control with clinical precision. She explained his plan with devastating clarity. He wanted everyone to believe I was crazy, she said into the camera, her voice steady as stone. So when something happened to me during childbirth, no one would ask questions. He would inherit my family's money, cover his fraud, and raise my daughter to believe her mother was insane. The interview went live at 7 in the morning. By 8, it was trending on every social media platform. By 9, it was the lead story on every news network in the country. Hashtag Justice for Sloane spread like wildfire. Investors fled Harrison's fund before the markets had even opened, pulling hundreds of millions in capital. The SEC announced an emergency investigation before lunch. Former employees of Prescott Capital began reaching out to journalists with their own stories of fraud and intimidation and abuse. At 2 in the afternoon, Harrison stormed into the television studio where Sloane was doing a follow-up interview. You think this changes anything? His face was red with fury. His expensive composure shattered completely. You think you can destroy me with a few tears and a sob story? I will bury you. I will take everything you love and burn it to the ground. Security guards moved to intercept him, but Sloane held up her hand. Let him speak, she said calmly, meeting his eyes without fear. Let everyone see exactly who he really is. The cameras were still rolling. Every word was being broadcast live to millions of viewers who had stopped their morning routines to watch this drama unfold. You are nothing, Harrison snarled, advancing toward her. You were nothing when I found you. A washed-up journalist with delusions of importance. And you will be nothing when I am done destroying whatever pathetic life you think you are building. Sloane stood up slowly, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, her chin lifted high. I was a Pulitzer-nominated journalist who exposed a corrupt governor and a pharmaceutical company poisoning children, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the studio. I was never nothing. Harrison, you just spent 3 years convincing me I was. But I remember now. I remember exactly who I am. Movement behind Harrison drew everyone's attention. 4 FBI agents in dark suits pushed through the studio doors, their badges visible on their belts. Harrison Prescott. The lead agent announced, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. As they cuffed him, right there in front of the cameras, right there in front of millions of viewers, Sloane walked closer. Not to gloat, not to threaten, just to say one thing she had needed to say for 3 long years. You should have let me go when I asked, she said quietly. You should have just let me walk away. The cameras captured everything. Harrison's face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally something that looked remarkably like fear. The FBI agents reading him his rights. The reporters shouting questions that would never be answered. That evening, Vivian Marlowe was arrested at her apartment, charged with assault and conspiracy. Claire Prescott was taken into custody at the family estate, charged with obstruction of justice and evidence tampering, and Sloane sat in a quiet hospital room, finally safe, watching the news coverage and feeling her daughter kick beneath her ribs. Strong kicks, determined kicks. The kicks of a little girl who had inherited her mother's fighting spirit. It was over. The trial was faster than anyone expected. The evidence too overwhelming for even Harrison's expensive lawyers to dispute effectively. Former employees testified in precise detail about the fraud. Financial records documented the stolen funds with damning clarity. And the video. Both the Gala footage and Harrison's own recorded boasting played repeatedly for the jury, showing exactly what kind of man Harrison Prescott truly was. Sloan testified on the third day. She wore a yellow dress, the same shade as the gown from the Gala, and she spoke without notes or hesitation. Some people ask me why I did not leave sooner, she said, looking directly at the jury, why I did not see who he was before I married him, before I became pregnant with his child. The answer is that abusers do not show you their true face until you are already trapped. They wait until you are isolated from everyone who loves you, until you are financially dependent, until you are pregnant and vulnerable and terrified, until leaving seems utterly impossible. That is not weakness. That is what survival looks like. She paused, gathering herself. For 3 years, I forgot who I was. I became the woman he wanted me to be. Small, quiet, invisible. I almost disappeared entirely. She looked at Harrison, sitting at the defense table, and her voice grew stronger. But I remembered. In the end, I remembered. And I hope anyone listening who is in a similar situation will remember too. You are not nothing. You are not crazy. And you do not have to stay silent. Sometimes our deepest pain becomes our greatest wisdom. What we learn in the darkness, we can carry into the light. Not as wounds that define us, but as knowledge that guides others still finding their way out. The verdicts came on a Friday afternoon, exactly 2 months after the gala that had started everything. Harrison Prescott, guilty on all counts. 15 years for fraud, 5 years for conspiracy, to be served consecutively. Vivian Marlowe, guilty of assault and conspiracy, 8 years. Claire Prescott, guilty of obstruction of justice, 3 years. When Judge Patricia Winters read the sentences, the courtroom erupted in applause that the bailiffs struggled to quiet. Sloan did not celebrate. She simply closed her eyes and breathed for what felt like the first time in 3 years. 2 weeks later, she went into labor. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft encouragement of the medical team. Dr. Ramona Hughes was there, calm and competent as always, talking Sloan through every contraction. B. Donovan sat in the waiting room with an enormous stuffed bear and happy tears streaming down her face. Della Thornton, finally released from custody after all charges were dropped, held Sloan's hand through every wave of pain. At 3:47 in the morning, after 16 hours of labor, Sloan's daughter entered the world. She was small and perfect, with dark hair and a cry that filled the room like music. The nurses wrapped her carefully in a soft blanket and placed her in Sloan's exhausted, trembling arms. Margot, Sloan whispered, touching her daughter's tiny face. Margot Callahan, her maiden name, not Prescott, never Prescott. She is beautiful, Della said softly, tears streaming down her own cheeks. She looks just like you. Sloan looked down at her daughter's face, seeing futures she had not dared to imagine. A life without fear, a childhood without shadows. A woman who would grow up knowing her own worth, knowing that her mother had fought for her, knowing that strength did not mean silence. 1 year later, Sloan opened a small cafe on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. She called it Grace and Light. It was not a business built for profit. Every employee had a story like hers. Women who had survived impossible situations. Women who were rebuilding their lives from the ashes. Women who needed a place where someone truly understood. In the corner near the front window sat a single wooden chair, restored and polished until it gleamed. A small brass plaque on the back read words that had become Sloan's motto. No one has the right to break a mother. Sloan worked behind the counter most mornings, Margot playing nearby in a small, portable playpen. She poured coffee and remembered names and listened to stories that visitors needed to tell. Sometimes she recognized something in a customer's eyes, that careful stillness, that practiced smile, the haunted look of someone trapped, and she would find a quiet moment to slide a card across the counter with a phone number and nothing else. The book came out 6 months after the cafe opened, The Woman in Yellow. It told her story without flinching, and it sold more copies in its first month than any publisher expected. All the profits went into a foundation for isolated abuse victims, women whose wealth made their suffering invisible, women whose golden cages looked like paradise from the outside. On the day she signed the final documents establishing the foundation, Sloan received a letter from Harrison. It came from the federal prison in Pennsylvania, where he would spend the next 2 decades contemplating his choices. You ruined me, Brian. The letter said, you destroyed everything I built. I hope you are satisfied. She read it once, then fed it through the paper shredder in her office without a second thought. That evening, she sat in the cafe after closing, Margot sleeping peacefully in her arms. The city glowed through the windows, a river of light flowing past. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was something she had built with her own hands, from her own pain, for her own purpose. The door chimed softly and Sloane looked up. A young woman stood in the entrance, nervous and uncertain. She could not have been older than 25. Her expensive clothes hung loosely on her thin frame. Her eyes had that careful, watchful quality that Sloane recognized immediately. I am sorry, the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you are closed, but I saw your interview, and I read your book, and I think, she stopped, her voice breaking. I think I am in the same situation. I do not know what to do. I do not know who else to talk to. Sloane looked at her for a long moment, seeing echoes of herself in this stranger's fear and desperation and fragile hope. Then she stood up carefully, cradling her sleeping daughter, and walked to the door. Come in, she said gently. Sit down. Tell me everything. The young woman's eyes filled with tears of relief. She stepped inside, and the door closed softly behind her. Outside, the first stars were appearing over the city. Inside, two women sat together in the warm golden light, one sharing her darkness, the other showing her the way out. Some stories end with a single moment of triumph. The villain arrested, the gavel falling, justice served, the credits rolling as the music swells. But real stories are messier than that. They continue past the happy ending, through the sleepless nights and the therapy sessions and the days when getting out of bed feels impossible. They are built slowly, painfully, one small choice at a time, one step forward after another. Sloane still had nightmares sometimes. She still flinched at loud voices and unexpected movements. She still caught herself, mid-sentence, wondering if what she was saying would make someone angry. But she also had this, a daughter who laughed easily and loved fiercely, friends who would never abandon her, work that mattered, purpose that filled her days with meaning instead of fear, and a voice that she used every single day for everyone who was still too afraid to speak. He wanted to silence me, Sloane said quietly, watching her daughter sleep in the golden light of the cafe she had built. Instead, he gave me my voice back, and now I use it for the world.